I think we can go ahead and get started. We are live right now. Welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to our second round of workshops for the day. Hopefully you enjoyed the morning sessions and the live brain breaks. Those are really fun. I encourage you to do that. So just so you know, you're at the right place. This is the workshop for Healthy Futures, an alternative to suspension curriculum. First, I want to go over some quick reminders. Just a reminder that these sessions are being recorded and they'll be made available to you next week. Also, all the slides will be made available to you. And also feel free to use the chat, the Q&A section if you want to throw in a question for the presenters. And also don't forget, we'll be collecting evaluations at the end of the day and you should be getting a link to that as well. And so I will just go ahead and hand it over to our presenters. We have our wonderful presenters from Stanford University School of Medicine, Division of Adolescent Medicine. We have Marcia Zorrilla, and who is a public health specialist and director of positive youth development, and Richard Ceballos, who's a project co-director of Tobacco Prevention Toolkit and Cannabis Awareness and Prevention Toolkit. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here and welcome to our workshop. What we're going to be covering today is a little bit about what's going on with e-cigarette usage. We're going to do an overview of Healthy Futures and then a quick evaluation and a wrap up. So what you're seeing represents the current data that we have right now from the Monitoring the Futures survey, which is an annual survey, which is nationwide and represents 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. And what it does is it discusses what is their alcohol, drug, and other drug use, and also their attitudes towards that. If you take a look at the image on the left, you'll see kind of like a snapshot of what daily nicotine vaping looks like for 8th, 10th, and 12th graders, which was first measured in 2019. And over to the right, you'll see a graph illustrating what's been going on for the last 2 years. And if you'll notice, there is, in terms of usage, the percentages have doubled in the past 2 years. So vaping has really taken off, as we all know. In terms of what youth are using, cigarette usage has dropped a lot. And in place, we have more students vaping nicotine products. And over the last 10 years or so, you'll see that cigarette smoking has really declined sharply. In terms of why teens are vaping more, there's two things that I wanted to bring up. One has to do with why they're vaping. So one has to do with them wanting to relax or relieve tension. And then the other one was about the fact that they're hooked. And those two are very significant from last year's report. But the other thing that I wanted to also bring up was the fact that now during sheltering in place, that a lot of our young people are experiencing greater stress, and it just speaks to what we can only predict for what's going to happen next year when this survey is done again. So we have a lot of young people that are under a lot of tension, and a lot of young people that are hooked on vapes. So in terms of what's going on in the news, about a year ago, we started hearing about EVLE, or these serious lung injuries that were happening for people that were vaping, and there were several deaths. The youngest one was a 15-year-old. In terms of the patients that were ill with this illness, over 50% were teenagers and young adults. And one of the things that I really wanted to point out has to do with informal products that they were using, especially the younger folks. And it's something for us to educate our young people that a lot of the products that they were using were from informal sources, meaning that they were using products from family and friends, or they were getting them online, or they were purchasing them through social media. So just making our young people aware of counterfeit products and that these products are very harmful to their health. So we would like to present a short video which illustrates the benefits of going smoke-free or vape-free. Sorry about that. So I wanted just to point out that a lot of the information that you're getting is available for free and online on our toolkit, and the address is located right there. And we'll make sure that we put it in the chat box. So we have a lot of COVID-19 resources that you could give to your students or give to families as well. So before we jump into the curriculum, I just want to present and acknowledge our amazing dream team, wonderful people, colleagues that are working really hard on various forms of our project. And I also like to acknowledge our Youth Action Board, so a group of 20 young people from the San Francisco Bay Area. We have 2 people from North Carolina and Maryland. They've done a variety of things from webinars to creating content for our curriculum and also our social media. And we also would like to thank our many sponsors and funders. So when you get to our website and you look up Healthy Futures, you'll be seeing kind of this page. So I just wanted to give you a little information about what that looks like. Let me just go back, I'm sorry. So we have a 1 hour and a 2 hour and a 4 hour. I just wanted to differentiate between all of those. The 1 hour is for one-to-one, and then the 2 to 4 hour, that would be for like a small group setting with a provider, facilitator with a group. And so the reason for us to come up with this particular curriculum is that there was a huge need for schools to help students that were caught vaping, and especially not to punish them for vaping, but to provide them with resources and ways to help them to quit in a very supportive environment, and not to have any type of confrontation with them, but to really to have a conversation about their vape use, having a very empathetic environment, and figuring out like what their future plans were in terms of changing their habits, and then providing them with resources so that they can quit vaping. So when you look at the different curricula, they're basically the same. The difference between the 1 and the 2 and 4 hour ones is the discussion piece, because that's like in a group setting. We're going to be kind of doing a little bit of the curriculum that would be the most kind of like the most useful, I believe, in especially in a school-based health center, especially working with kind of one-to-one with students. But you know, again, some clinics do work in group settings as well. So what we're going to show you is we're going to show you a couple of the worksheets, which is the where are you at worksheets, and then there's a Healthy Futures handbook that includes motivational interviewing and decisional balance integrated in the handbook, and then we're going to have some informational slides for you. So when you look at the very first you should be getting the link in the chat. So kind of like when you look at the very first one, it has to do with where is the youth at when it comes to vaping. And so it's geared to really understanding where they are at right now, what are the products that they're using, and then how often they're using. And then at the bottom, there's a kind of like a little ruler that kind of like will tell us, the provider, where they're at when it comes to smoking and their readiness to make any kind of change. And so we would want to know why did they pick that number? Oops, not moving. Sorry about that. Give me a second. Tell me a little bit more why you picked that particular number, where you're at, and why didn't you pick a lower number? And what will it take you to go 2 to 3 steps higher, or 2, 3 numbers higher? And then before getting onto the curriculum is to thank them, and if they have any questions before continuing with the session. So I could imagine that perhaps maybe if this was to be broken up in terms of people implementing this curriculum, it could be a health educator, or it could be part of it could be done by maybe a medical assistant, and then the rest would be done by a health educator or a therapist or a nurse. So there's it all depends on your particular setup at your clinic. And now for this part, Richard will be talking about the Healthy Futures Handbook and going over the informational slides.
Hi, everybody. We will be including some links to these downloads for the worksheet that you just saw on the previous slide, along with a downloadable link for the Healthy Futures Handbook. Now, I know we are not currently seeing students in person, but the Healthy Futures Handbook is great for asking questions and motivating students around their quit plan. So you'll notice that the Healthy Futures Handbook is organized by topics in the actual Healthy Futures curriculum. On the next slide, Marcia, if you mind. Yeah, thank you. So you'll see a few more of the topics, and I'm going to cover them. So Marcia and I decided to focus on health effects and the brain. We thought those are really key topics to the work that you're doing out there. We thought we'd give you a taste of the curriculum and go over some of the slides. That way you feel equipped in terms of the information, but you can also get a better sense of how you might use this in your setting. So right here with the handbook, just a few other topics. And if you look through the actual download, you'll see how you can use some of these questions depending on particular topic of interest, whether that's health effects, cost, your brain, or marketing, or messaging. So here are some of the Healthy Futures informational slides. What you're seeing right here is just a snapshot of all the slides, which I'm not going to go over in detail, but I thought I'd show you them real quick, and we'll focus on a few. That way in this session, you can get just some updates on the health effects of using e-cigarettes or pod vapes. So if you're on the chat right now, I thought this would be really cool, be a really cool time to just check in with some of you by asking you this question. So when you talk to young people, what are some of the long-term health effects of vaping that you mention, or what are some of your talking points that you mention when you're talking about the long-term health effects? So I'll give you a moment, if you have your chat open, to just type in any talking points that you offer young people when you're going over the health effects of vaping. And if you don't know, that's fine. I'll go over a few in a minute or two. So feel free to type in any responses or any talking points you have for when you're thinking about the long-term health effects of vaping. Just to revisit what Marcia was talking about earlier with EVOLI, we do know that there have been some sickness and young people have been hospitalized from using these devices. The problem with using e-cigarettes is that they've only been on the market for about 12 years, so we don't know everything about it. So I like this question in some ways because it's kind of like a trick question, right? We don't know everything about the long-term health effects, but we do know enough to inform young people so they can make a wise decision about using these devices. So if we're thinking about some of the health effects, I'm going to cover that in the slides. We're going to focus primarily on the heart and lungs. And I'm hoping that you can walk away with some information on how to talk about this with young people. And just the shapes you saw before, I just want to let you know, those are linked up with the Healthy Futures Handbook. So the reason why you're seeing that is young people would be able to fill out their Healthy Futures Handbook while they're seeing these slides. So that's one way you can use the slides and the handbook at the same time. Okay, so I'm going to just provide a quick overview of what the aerosol and nicotine does to someone's body. So I'll go over this in more detail in a few slides, but what nicotine mainly does is rewires and turns your brain against you. So once your body thinks nicotine is important for survival, that's when you're stepping into the addiction space. Nicotine in particular, these newer pod e-cigarettes, so that includes Juul and Puff Bar, contain something called salt-based nicotine. That type of nicotine is easier for a young person to inhale. The industry designed it that way so that young people can become hooked to nicotine a lot easier. But what that type of nicotine does to the heart is it makes it beat a lot faster, and that could put some stress on the heart. It hasn't been studied in detail, but we do know that it can put someone in this fight or flight mode. The aerosol in the actual, that which is released from the e-cigarette or pod vape, you'll sometimes hear the word vapor, which doesn't perfectly describe what's coming out of it. It's actually a mixture of chemicals known as an aerosol. So if you're familiar with some of the messaging that goes on with anti-vaping, the aerosol part is really important. And we know that it can damage vessels in your circulatory system, which I'll explore with all of you pretty soon. There's another slide on it. The aerosol, though, is not only having effects on your circulatory system and your heart, but also is doing damage to your lungs. So that's something I'll talk about in more detail coming up. But right now is just an overview of all the health effects. We also know that the nicotine can increase your acid reflux in your gastrointestinal tract. So right here is just a picture of your stomach. We know that it's changing the chemistry there. And this is something that we need to share with young people. So on the previous slide, we saw all of the organs and parts of the body that are being affected by the aerosol and nicotine. So let's talk broadly about the aerosol, but how it affects the lungs in particular. So what you're going to see are a few images of what the aerosol is known to do to the lungs. In the lungs, we have our airways, and inflammation and irritation can appear or happen as a result of breathing in this cocktail of chemicals, also known as the aerosol. Another thing we know is that there can be a destruction of the air sacs in the lungs. So a lot of what you're seeing shouldn't surprise you. It's not too different from what we know about the long-term health effects of smoking. They've been studying e-cigarettes a little more, and this is what they're finding out so far. Another point that was mentioned in the video that we watched on your risk for COVID-19 is the lowering of your immune system or weakening your immune system by having these aerosol chemicals come into your lungs and interfering with the function of your immune cells in your lungs. So this is a really important point to stress right now, especially during the pandemic. You want young people, you want to encourage them to go smoke or vape free so they can have their lungs ready to fight if they are exposed to this virus. Now, looking at some of the studies that have looked at the heart, this is what we currently know about how the aerosol affects someone's heart. So I mentioned some of these points earlier, but the aerosol can impair blood vessel function. It can also cause a stiffening of the blood vessels, which will decrease your blood flow throughout your body. This is concerning because a lot of these characteristics, like also risk for blood clotting, are associated with your risk for cardiovascular disease over the years. So this is what the aerosol is doing. This cocktail of chemicals isn't good for your health. It's not helping you. If you're a young person and you're playing sports or you're just trying to stay as healthy as possible, these chemicals are not helping you in that way. Now, something that I mentioned before was the salt-based nicotine. This slide really looks at how the salt-based nicotine is changing the game in terms of delivering more nicotine. So what we know about a pack of cigarettes is that when we look at the science of nicotine, for each cigarette that a person uses, they're actually delivering about 1 milligram of nicotine. So 1 milligram of nicotine equals 1 cigarette. That's what I want you to just keep in mind right now as we walk through this slide. So once again, 20 cigarettes, that'd be 20 milligrams of nicotine. So 20 milligrams of nicotine is 20 cigarettes. These newer devices, such as the Juul Pod, what you'll notice is that they're packed with a lot more nicotine, and all that nicotine in that pod has a potential of delivering 41.3 milligrams of nicotine, which in terms of cigarettes, if you want to talk cigarettes, that is looking more like 41 cigarettes. So what you're seeing right here is just a representation of the potential for addiction with these newer devices. You're probably wondering, why is it so easier to deliver more nicotine with these devices? Well, the salt-based nicotine formula, what it does is it really reduces the harshness of the throat hit. So a young person who may be nicotine naive will be breathing in this aerosol, and if that nicotine is salt-based, it's not going to scratch their throat as much and turn them off from wanting to use this. Some of the other devices we're looking at right here, such as the puff bar, contains more nicotine. The way they're able to load in more nicotine is by having a bigger pod or a bigger volume. That's why there is more nicotine associated with these devices. And lastly, the Soren pod, which has up to 90 milligrams of nicotine. Remember, 1 milligram of nicotine, 1 cigarette, right? So that's 90 cigarettes of nicotine that someone can be delivering by using some of these small pods, which when looking at, compared to a pack of cigarettes in size, you may think, oh, it's just a small pod, doesn't seem too harmful. I can't have that much nicotine, but the industry has really worked to create these discrete devices which are just packed with nicotine and can really get a young person addicted pretty quickly. If you're going over this with a group of young people who have used, just the main takeaway, it contains a lot of nicotine. Okay, so like before, I showed you just an overview or a snapshot of the slides we have in this part of the curriculum. This one is called Your Brain. So what I want to do with all of you real quick is, once again, if in the chat, just type in what you think it means to be addicted. So this is just like we're going through the curriculum as if you're the students. You can include a student response, or you can include something, maybe some talking points that you usually include when you're talking to a young person about this. So just give yourself a moment, read over this. And if you have a comment about what it means to be addicted, please include that in the chat. So if you still want to put something in the chat, go ahead. I'm going to just share just some talking points about addiction or just some thoughts around it. So when we talk about addiction science, sometimes people ask me, hey, Richard, is it mainly based on genetics? Is it based on their environment? And what they have found out is it's a little bit of both, right? When we're talking about someone's risk for addiction. If you come from a family where there are reported cases of a lot of your family members being addicted, the chances are if you come across a drug or substance, you could become addicted. And that's something to be mindful of. But if you're also living in an environment where you're being exposed to a lot of this marketing and messaging, that could also increase your chances of using and becoming addicted or dependent. So that's something just to keep in mind when you're talking about addiction. But you have to also remember, if you're a young person and your brain is finishing up some of its key parts of brain development, you also don't want to be adding drugs to the equation, because what that will do is hijack your brain a lot easier than an adult brain. So I'm going to go over some slides covering that material. Once again, the shapes just correspond to the Healthy Futures Handbook. Now, this slide right here is just covering some main points about how drugs can affect the brain. Now, when you talk to a young person about the payoff for using drugs, over time, it's not a great payoff, because what your brain does is pretty smart, is whenever you stimulate the reward pathway, so that's a part of your brain that produces a chemical called dopamine. Some of us may already be familiar with it, but that's the pleasure chemical. And what that does to someone's brain is, like a drug, if they're stimulating that part of the brain, it tells their brain like, oh, this is good. I like this. It makes me feel good. The only problem is this is an artificial stimulation. Over time, the brain will outsmart that drug. And what it'll basically do is respond less to that chemical. So for a young person, the payoff may seem amazing at the beginning, like, oh, wow, I feel really good by using this. But over time, the brain will not want to respond to it. And a young person will probably use more to try to feel more of the response. But that's when you step into addiction. At that point, if someone's using a lot to try to fill the drug, their brain is probably just desensitized, and they're probably feeling withdrawal symptoms, which is why they're using. Now, the way drugs really go through the brain and take advantage of it is by mimicking chemicals we already produce. So we have endogenous or natural neurotransmitters, and drugs will come in, like in this instance with acetylcholine. So if we're talking about nicotine, like with this visual you're seeing, what nicotine will do is it will actually mimic acetylcholine. And what that does is it leads to a chain reaction, which will eventually produce dopamine. So nicotine, which you're seeing right here in the orange, will bind to these acetylcholine receptors, and the chain reaction will occur. A young person will feel pleasure. Something I want to say when you're talking about this in terms of pleasure is that some young people that you're working with may come from backgrounds where maybe they don't have a strong parental support, maybe they don't have a community, maybe they don't have a good support system. So a lot of the reasons they may be using these drugs and to begin with is they want to feel good. And you have to remind them there's nothing wrong with wanting to feel good. It's really about how they do that. So with drugs, it may seem like an easy way, in which it is, and they can really take a shortcut to feeling good. But over time, it's really going to screw over their brain. And what it'll do is it will fill it less. And you don't want to have to be addicted to these chemicals and have it take over your habits in your life. So remember, we talked about in the last section the health effects and how these products are being engineered and designed. And remember, I talked about salt-based nicotine. So that's one feature that allows young people, or makes it easier for young people to use these devices or become addicted to nicotine. So with a cigarette, which you're seeing here, there are a few features that we're aware of from our tobacco education that really allow for someone to use a cigarette and become addicted a lot easier. So this slide is just pointing a few of those out for you. So tobacco companies, big tobacco, will increase the amount of nicotine. They'll use menthol to mask the harshness of that nicotine hit. So We know that these flavorings and other components, which is not too different from e-cigarettes. So when you think about e-cigarettes, you are still talking about tobacco here, but this is more like the cigarette 2.0, the new cigarette, right? And the reason why I have question marks here on this slide is to indicate that we haven't really studied some of these other parts of the device. So we don't know if they're using bronchodilators, if they're using acetaldehyde in this product in a Juul device. And this is something we have to investigate. But the e-cigarette companies had their playbook. They didn't have to reinvent a lot of these features. They just used them again in their product to get young people to use. So the other section we have is on messaging. We won't be going over the actual slides for this, but I just wanted you to see what we're offering here. So in this section, we're really looking at some of the messages that young people encounter, whether that is through print or media, but also on social media, and how some of these products are painted to be harmless, that they're okay for their health, it can make them feel better, when we know that's not the case. So that's what this section really looks at. Another section that we wanted to include is we do know that it's very effective when you talk about price with what young people are spending and how much you're spending on some of these newer pod-based e-cigarettes. So right here is just another section looking at the costs and really looking at it from an angle in terms of what could you be spending, the money that you're spending on tobacco or e-cigarettes, how can you use that money for other parts of your life, other things you want to invest in for your future. So that's a lot of our angle for this curriculum, is really empowering them by asking them these types of questions. The final slides in our curriculum are to support young people in your session, or if you're doing a one-on-one, we have these quick shout outs to these resources. So this is through the Truth Initiative. This is a resource that offers daily quitting tips, something that they can use on their cell phone. And it's an interface that our team's familiar with. It's very easy to use. So they can immediately text Ditch Juul to this number. And the thing is, it's pretty cool because they'll follow up with you, check in with you, ask you questions, give you facts, just see how you're doing. So that's one resource. Here's another one. This is teensmokefree.gov. There is a number they can call. And just a reminder for us who are doing this work, you're probably already aware of this, but young people really have to be ready to quit. It starts with them. With this curriculum, we're hoping you can motivate them towards that, or at least get a plan set up if they're going to consider it in the future, quitting. So thing is, if a young person is ready, if they want to write this number down, maybe they won't call it immediately, but at least they know it's there. Some of the resources focus on smoking, and it's great to see ones that are primarily focused on e-cigarettes. So this is another great resource through the California Smokers Helpline, and they can call this number. So any resource that's focused on e-cigarettes is great, and if you can provide that or just make it visible to a young person, they know they can reach out to those resources. And here's another one, My Life, My Quit. Some of these are limited to certain states, so just keep that in mind when you're looking through this. Another point that I want to mention is our teacher talking points are here. So a lot of what I'm saying is already included in the notes section of the slide. And if you're wondering like, oh, Richard, you're saying a lot, how do I capture all that today? It's actually in our teacher talking points. So all those caveats about this being for a particular state or for a particular individual, don't worry, it's all there for you to read over and familiarize yourself with.
So after the PowerPoint presentation is done, what you would do with the young person is sort of give them the kind of like a follow-up with the where are you at? And again, we're going to find out how they feel about vapes now that they heard the education that was provided to them. And it could be that they may say that I'm not really interested, I might want to cut back, or I might want to quit. So kind of depending on what they say will lead you to the next discussion with them. Have them come up with a goal for themselves for the next 30 days, even if they're not quite there to quit yet. And then what is it that they need help with? Do they need a friend to help them? Do they need a hotline that we just heard about, all these different hotlines? What is it that they need to accomplish their goals? And similarly to what Richard was saying, all of these handouts that we have here, it also has a lot of talking points so that you could also be comfortable when you're doing your sessions with your young people. So some of the prompts that you might want to use when you see when you get your sheet back from the student is you might see that they selected a higher number, so you could ask them what brought that change, and what do they see as the next steps. And basically, towards the end of the session is really thanking them for attending, because a lot of times when students are caught vaping on campus, they're they're afraid, and they don't want to get in trouble and that kind of thing. So it really takes a lot for them to be able to attend this type of session. And as long as you can provide them with a very safe space and a place that's very, like I said earlier, very empathetic to where they're at, they'll be able to share more with you. You could offer, again, as we said earlier, some more free resources that if they like it, if they think it would be helpful. And if you're a 2P person, you might want to refer the student to the 2P person if there's one, or it could be another wellness person, staff that you have at your clinic. So kind of like whatever follow-up plans that would be helpful for the young person, just to have like a set of referrals ready for them. And it's just one point. So making sure you have everything ready before before you meet with your students, so that they have all those resources available to them. So we have on social media, so we have Facebook and we have Twitter, so feel free to follow us and tag us in any pictures you post. Love to hear from you. And that's also a way to kind of get updates as far as either curricula or other events that we do. So we did a bunch of parent webinars and educator webinars over the summer, so that's a way to get informed. And that's our contact information. If you have any questions or if you'd like additional information, be happy to help you with that.
Marcia, we currently have a few Q&A questions, so
Sure.
I'm not sure if you want to do the eval first or if you want to address some of those questions before that.
Well, let's do the questions.
Okay, so the first question, I'm just going from bottom to top. So have you heard of an increase of vape use since the COVID pandemic? Maybe you already answered this. I can say that, oh, go ahead, Marcia.
Oh, go ahead, Richard.
Well, one point that I have heard about is young people using more cigarettes during this time. That's something that we've been hearing about. We haven't looked at, so the problem is doing the surveys, like Marcia was talking about earlier, we're probably going to find out how much usage is actually taking place. So that will be a good place, a good resource for looking at that data. Marcia, I don't know what you wanted to say for this question.
There was something that I read, and actually I have it right here, about the complications associated with vaping and COVID, that the U.S. the U.S. Surgeon General had responded and said that they speculated that part of that vaping might be the reason why the U.S. has seen higher percentages of young people diagnosed with COVID-19 in other countries. And that was something that he reported in March. It was televised. So it just kind of like speaks to the need for us to really inform our young people about the harms associated with vaping, especially now during COVID. So thank you for that question.
That's a great question. The next question
Mhm.
is, what can we do when we encounter school administrative staff that are more interested in punishing students for bringing vaping products on campus rather than creating a learning opportunity? Also, can the 4-hour session be divided into multiple lessons?
You could definitely divide the 4-hour session into multiple sessions, and the same with the 2 hours. So kind of like based on how your needs and how you would work it at your school. Um, what I would say to the administrators about punishing students is that we already know that punishment doesn't work. It's not effective. And what we want to do is that, I mean, if you think about the whole youth development movement and how we are developing young people, and so what better way to do that by providing them with the tools that they need so that they can quit vaping, so that they can be healthier adults. Um, Even with the youth action board that we work with, they're totally against any form of punishment. They want their peers to learn about ways to take care of their health, but also that they're not informed about really what the harms are in these vape products. I mean, and we're talking about products that have been around not too long, and we don't know, like what Richard was saying, about like all the harms yet. But the data that is out there, we know that it is harmful, but we also know that a lot of youth are still do not know too much about them.
Yeah, and I've noticed that talking about e-cigarettes and the harms associated with using them is a great opportunity, like Marcia's saying, to talk about student wellness and just being a young person and what it means to be healthy. So I think if you can pitch it that way, it's just a better reason to have these learning opportunities, use this curriculum for students who are caught. So it's really a chance for them to feel empowered about the information they're hearing and just think more deeply about maybe why they're using these products. Okay, Marcia, I have one more question for us. How do we help students quit? Most students that I talk to admit that vaping is the only way that they can cope with stress/anxiety. The closest that I've gotten a student to quitting is they promise to lower the nicotine amount.
So I would want to know from the student what are some alternatives that they can do for coping with stress. So that was something that our youth action board worked on over the summer, talking about being under shelter in place and having these stressors, or what are young people doing in terms of quitting or not, and sort of like, well, what is the replacement for that person if they're not going to be using nicotine anymore? And kind of working with them as far as like, well, what are some things that you could do in place of it? So can they do meditation? Can they knit? Can they go for a bike ride or a walk? So kind of depending on the student and what it is that they're interested in it. And the way to find that out is just, continue to have those conversations with them in terms of like, what are some like other alternatives, other healthy alternatives that they can come up with.
And to add to what Marcia is saying, for some talking points around this topic, it's really about empowering young people to learn how to activate, their dopaminergic center of their brain, right? Like it's like what produces dopamine for me. And a lot of the times they may not know all of that because their brain is figuring that out. And that's a good thing. Like they are at a stage of development where they're trying to figure out what fires dopamine for me naturally. And if you can help them in that process, identify what helps them fire that dopamine, whether it's listening to music, going for a walk with their friends, or doing any of those activities, then it's more power to them. They know, okay, instead of using this product, which is a lot of the messaging we get in this country, like use this to feel better, use that to feel better. If you can change the conversation and get young people to think, oh, I'm not feeling well, maybe I should do A, B, or C, then that really puts the power or the ball in their court. And that's what we want to do with this curriculum as well.
I just want to add on to what Richard was saying. There was an activity that I did in a kind of in a classroom setting where it was just doing that. It was just asking them, well, what fires up your dopamine, just going around in the classroom. And you could do the same thing like in a one-to-one or in a group setting. So, well, fires up your dopamine. That youth are very interested in their brains and how the brain functions. And I think that's definitely a way for at least to start that conversation with them as far as like what's a good replacement for you in terms of nicotine use and things like that. So, thank you.
Yeah, and I know just that to mention one thing about in that comment about lowering nicotine, the nicotine content, we know these pod vapes do contain a lot of nicotine. So if that's part of their plan to eventually get off nicotine by lowering their amount, that's something you can support them with and come up with a plan where eventually they don't have to be dependent on that nicotine. We have some more questions coming in on the Q&A, so let me read those real quick. So here's one question. Since we might not be catching students vaping right now due to distance learning, what are some suggestions for supporting students?
I have to say that just even from the youth that are part of the Youth Action Board, they are incredibly overwhelmed with school right now. If there is a way that through the kind of like the online platforms that they're on right now with you all, if there's a way that you could dedicate a time where you could check in with them and just see how they're doing. If there's a way to integrate kind of like what we did today, this morning, if some of you went to the Wellness Wednesday activity that we had today where we did meditation and exercise, if there's a way that your school can do something like that where they could have a few moments where they can either share or meditate or do something, because our young people are incredibly stressed right now. And a lot of from what they're telling me, the workload is incredibly intense for them. So I would really encourage everyone to try to integrate some time with them and get to do some kind of check-in with them and see how they're doing and take it from there.
Yeah, I think that's a great response, Marcia. We want our young people to feel supported. And I know as adults, we're like struggling to cope with everything going on right now. So we have to be there for them and just remind them like, hey, we're here to listen. We're here to see how you're doing and empower you in any way we can. Another question we received that just came in is, do students admit right away that they are vaping? Or do students admit it rapidly that they are vaping?
I think it depends on the person that they're talking with. You kind of like have to set the stage for them to be able to feel comfortable sharing. The whole, especially like in a clinical setting, the confidential setting, and just making them feel welcome, that you're not in trouble. Let's have a conversation. And I mean, depending on how much the student feels comfortable sharing, they will. But if you're approaching it from a point of like, you're in trouble, you're a bad person, and I'm not saying that that's what you all are doing, but if they feel that, it's going to be really difficult for them to be forthcoming with their use.
Thank you, Marcia. So that's all we have for the Q&As. If you have any questions, we have a little bit of time left, but we also have our training eval. So if you have your cell phone in front of you, or if you have your computer, you can type in the link. I know the conference is also offering an eval, but we wanted to get this feedback just to see how we did today on this training or presentation of the Healthy Futures curriculum.
Looks like there aren't any other questions. So as Richard mentioned, there's the link for, or you can scan the QR code for their evaluation, and also for the conference evaluation end of the day, you should be receiving a link for that as well. And the recording will be available next week, also the slides. Hopefully you were able to catch some of those links I put in there for a lot of those great resources that they shared. And did you share your, oh, you did in the previous slide, you shared your email addresses. Any other final words before we wrap up? Looks like we're all done. Okay, well, thank you so much. Hopefully you can join us for our next session that we have in honoring, paying tribute to Dr. Barbara Staggers, who's a champion for school health. That should go live right at 1:30. So once it's 1:30, you should be able to see that at the top of your agenda. If not, sometimes it's weird trying to navigate. You might have to go to the filter function to find it. And then we still have another great day tomorrow. But thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Marcia and Richard, so much for sharing such valuable information. Thank you, everyone.